All right, thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Appreciate you being here. This is the third year that I have had the privilege of moderating this breakfast, if you will. First year was in person, and here we are in year two of Zoom, but fortunate that we can still get together and still connect and talk about really an important part of the workplace and an important part of the Alzheimer's Association's mission to help people in whatever way they can. So again, honored to be here. I've been with the association in a volunteer capacity for about 5 years now. Got involved as my grandmother was ending a marathon 20-year battle with the disease. And it's extremely important to me and my family, and always want to do whatever I can to help out. So this breakfast, this discussion has proved really beneficial to me and to so many others over the past few years. So if you haven't been with us, I think you're going to find it useful, and hopefully you can glean something from it. We have an incredible panel. We'll get to them momentarily. First, though, to lead us off, I want to introduce the Executive Director and Regional Leader of the Alzheimer's Association for the Northern California and Northern Nevada chapter, Elizabeth Edgerly. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, Grant, and welcome, everybody. Good morning to you, Grant. You know, I'm so sorry whenever I hear about your grandmother's story with Alzheimer's and what you and your family went through. I always regret that, and yet I am so grateful that you are volunteering with us and that I get to work with you, we get to work with you. And so many of us here today probably have stories. I know I do. My mother died with Lewy body dementia over 2 years ago. We see it all around us, and many of us are very closely impacted. I wanted to start today by talking about the work of the Alzheimer's Association and helping you to see yourselves in our mission. Whether you personally have been affected, have a family member, whether you're a caregiver or not, I almost guarantee you know people who are caregiving or who have been living with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. And we need your help. We need you to join with us in this mission. So the work of the Alzheimer's Association, as you can read on the screen, is about leading the way to end Alzheimer's and all types of dementia. And we really have three components to our work: accelerating global research, driving risk reduction and early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. So our vision is a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementias for everyone affected. One of the things that we've learned over the last year, and Brittany, it's okay to go to the next slide, is that there are different groups of people who are affected differently by Alzheimer's and dementia. First, let me just start with the big picture numbers. So 1 in every 3 senior dies with or from Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. So 1 out of 3, huge numbers. It unfortunately kills more people than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. This year, for the first time, we are seeing that more than 6 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's. Previously, it was 5.8 million. The numbers are going up. And the reason the numbers are going up is in large part, because we're living longer and because the baby boomers have hit that bump, so that now we have more people than ever before. And many of those individuals are your parents or grandparents, or in my case, you know, my mother was affected even though she was older than a baby boomer. Older adults are disproportionately affected, obviously, by Alzheimer's. It's an expensive disease. It's the most expensive disease right now. We estimate about $355 billion spent on Alzheimer's and related dementias. And the individual with dementia is not the only person affected. There are 11 million caregivers. And as I mentioned before, I guarantee you know people, and they may not have even told you that they're caring for a loved one with dementia, but it is impacting them. So we're seeing real changes, real struggles here, and in particular in diverse populations. I mentioned about different communities being differently affected. Well, I'm going to show you some stats in a little bit to show you how different groups are affected. But we did a research study at the Alzheimer's Association to learn more from diverse populations. And we learned some things that really gave us pause. The risk of discrimination, the experience of discrimination among communities of color is significant, and it plays into their ability to get Alzheimer's and dementia care. Individuals who are Black or Hispanic are much more likely to have Alzheimer's, but much more likely to be delayed in getting a diagnosis or care. And in our survey, we found that half of survey respondents who were Black or African American reported that they have experienced discrimination and that they expect to experience discrimination if there's a new treatment coming out. Similarly, for Native Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, our communities of color are experiencing and expect to experience discrimination. And we need to make sure that does not happen and is not happening. So one of the other things that we're doing is to really focus on reaching diverse communities, focusing on research in diverse communities, and making sure that treatments are there for everyone. The last thing I want to mention on this slide is the particular challenge we had this year with COVID. You may have heard in the news that COVID disproportionately affected people with Alzheimer's. The number of deaths went up last year alone by 16% of people with Alzheimer's and dementia. So this was a major year of heartache and sorrow and loss for many, many people, and in particular in the homes of those living with and loving individuals with dementia. So we'll go to the next slide, but I'm gonna wrap up very soon. As I mentioned, we see health disparities, and our focus is on addressing these systemic inequities around health and around research, and making sure that individuals are able to get good quality care in a timely manner. Go ahead to the next slide, Brittany. So how does this all relate to you in the workplace? Well, as I've been mentioning, your colleagues are caregivers, and 6 out of 10 caregivers are employed. So they're working someplace and they may be working alongside you. If any of you have been caregivers or are, you know, this means you are pulled in lots of different directions all at the same time. And so we want to be there for you. We want to be there for your employees. And we invite you to join us in this mission of ours. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over for our mission moment and introduce Andy. Andy Wang is going to share his story about his dad. So Andy, thanks for joining us. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. So before I begin my story, I'd like to give you a little background on my dad. So growing up, he's always been a very disciplined man, having joined the Navy at 18 years of age, fleeing the Civil War in China to Taiwan in the late 40s. So he's always been a very serious person, but also very much a Lone Ranger. So in grade school, my mother, myself, and my brother moved to the Bay Area while my dad stayed behind in Taiwan, as there were more opportunities for them there. He started his own business and ran it for many years before he retired at the age of 70. He passed away in late 2019, just before the pandemic began. So I spent the course of 18 years taking care of him from a distance. So during this time, he began showing signs of dementia. So in some Asian cultures, there's a stigma surrounding dementia itself. While I didn't have this type of thinking, I kept this condition from his friends and family out of respect for him. For those of you here today, I'd like to offer a few pieces of advice for employee caregivers. The first is don't regret anything. Spend time with your family. When my grandmother passed suddenly while I was in my 20s, I was actually away on a business trip. During that grieving process, I said to myself I would never, ever want to have regrets like this. My second piece of advice is talk to your boss and work together on a plan. So prior to Ronstar RiseSmart, I was at Monster.com for over 10 years. I talked to my boss about my father's condition and told my boss I would never miss a beat while taking care of my father 6,000 miles away. And I also needed the flexibility as a condition of employment to visit him. And so I kept that promise while building that trust at work. And that carried over to Ross.RiseSmart until my dad's passing in 2019. So have that conversation and be upfront, and you can actually make it happen. And that last piece of advice, it's actually okay to ask for help. I called the free 24/7 Alzheimer's helpline. It was truly 24/7 as I called really late at night. At a time of physical and mental desperation, I didn't know how to cope. I was connected with someone, and I started to tell my story as a long-distance caretaker. Then I received the best piece of advice, which is to take care of yourself so you can continue to support him. The idea of that personal well-being was so foreign to me at first, because it's always been about him and not me. I usually spent that time, with him when I'm in Taiwan. I traveled there, used to be every 3 months, and then towards the last 2 years of his life was almost every month. And I spent the entire day with him from the moment he woke up till the moment he went to bed. And my only break was a quick lunch, and then I was working. Then because of this advice, I began to change my routine, breaking up my day to give myself a little time to breathe. I started taking a longer lunch, took 2 hours and then came back. And then I spent more time with him and chatting with him and watching TV. It changed my mental state and reset really how I looked at things. And I was really on my way in making those memories with my father. And like I said, in my first piece of advice, no regrets. But I'll leave you with one example of that. So very traditional Asian families like mine, we don't really hug. But I didn't want to go through life with, regretting that I never gave my dad a hug. A real hug, what I call a real American hug. And so when I was leaving for California on one of my trips, I said to him at the door, I said, I'm going to do something different from the usual handshakes that he would give me when I leave. And I said, Dad, I'm actually coming in for a real hug. Really, my arms open. I said, I'm coming in. And for me, it was the most beautiful moment. And even 2 years after his passing, I really continue to smile every time I think of that moment. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to connecting with you.
Andy, you made us all smile and brought a little tear to my eye when you shared that. So thank you for opening up and being vulnerable and trying to help other people as they navigate these rough waters. So appreciate you sharing that, Andy. And thanks also to Dr. Edgerly for that intro. If you're watching at home or at the office or wherever you may be, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat button. We'd love to know what your connection is to Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia, why you're here today. We encourage you to type that reason in the chat, your connection. Also the Q&A button just to the right of that. If you have a question, we will try to get to it, time permitting, today. And if not, it could be a question that we tackle during another session. So those are two little areas where you can contribute. When I am not helping out the Alzheimer's Association and raising a 4 and a 6-year-old, my job is a news anchor at Chron 4 in the Bay Area. Been there for almost 11 years. I anchor the 5 and 9 p.m. broadcasts Monday through Friday. And Chron 4 actually shares a building with ABC 7, which brings me to our first panelist. Everybody's going to introduce themselves. We'll start with Bradley Hoffman, who works at KGO, ABC 7. Never met you in person, Bradley, but I'm sure one of these days, maybe with a mask, maybe not. But Bradley, why don't you introduce yourself, your role at ABC 7, and why you're here today?
Yeah, so thank you, Grant. Yes, we do sometimes pass the ships in the night with the 2 stations in the same building. Yep. My name is Bradley Hoffman. I'm the Human Resources Manager for ABC 7. We are owned by the Walt Disney Company, so we sort of roll up into a much larger entity that most of you are all very familiar with, and is a global operation. This is something I did attend the breakfast a couple of years ago. It's a fond memory now when we all gathered in close quarters in a room just off the Embarcadero and had some food and talked about this topic that is so important. And I'll be honest, I'm to this point in life, and I count every day fortunate that I've not been as directly touched by Alzheimer's as some of you, as Andy and others, but I recognize that it's out there, that it's, to some extent, it's probably a matter of time. I have had relatives with varying degrees of dementia, and I love that that's a larger focus as well, because it is something very real that, of course, comes about and creates issues. And if from a human resources perspective, again, there's that dual approach to it. One, of course, is if and when someone that is on my staff begins to experience these issues, that of course can create work problems and performance issues that have to be addressed. And I do have some folks, we have quite some very long tenured people working at the station. And then of course, the part that really hits home for me, I think, is that caregiver aspect, that sandwich generation aspect, the folks that really have to come to a building and perform a task and do it well and professionally every day, and yet could be having these very large issues that are pulling focus, pulling their mental resources, their health resources, right? As we all know, we all read the articles from time to time about none of us are getting enough sleep. And when you hear about some of the things that people are dealing with outside of the work that they're employed with, you really start to appreciate, gosh, where at all are they finding the time to sleep and take care of themselves? So very, very near and dear to me to appreciate, because I take it to heart how much I support the people that I get the privilege of supporting. And that support is beyond just the work, but extending to what they are dealing with in their lives so that they can come into the workplace and be effective and sane. So thank you very much for having me today, and really happy to be here and to be able to provide some insights.
Appreciate it, Bradley. In the interest of time, Kiva, if you could go next, and we're going to try to get to the questions here quickly. Kiva, if you could introduce yourself and your name and your job and your title, etc.
Sure. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. My name is Kiva Wilson. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Senior Vice President for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Material. We are a modern marketing services firm based primarily out of Los Angeles, but I am based out of Oakland, reflective of our geographic flexibility, which I think we'll talk a bit more about in terms of how we show up and support caregivers, but also those that are directly affected by Alzheimer's and dementia. And just to answer your real question at the core, Grant, I was talking to my wife about this morning, and her grandmother and my mother-in-law are, her grandmother was directly died of Alzheimer's, but specifically it's something that weighs on my mother-in-law's mind regularly. It's just the anxiety, if you will, of all the things she possibly can do to try and stay ahead of Alzheimer's, since it runs within the family. So I'll have to simply say it's within our family circle. And I think, as we all know, just given to conversation already today, it's something that touches us in a lot of direct ways and indirect ways. And I'm glad to be a part of the conversation representing Material.
Sounds good, Kiva. Thank you. Kim, next.
Sure. My name is Kimberly Brackett, and I'm a Vice President of Human Resources for Ronstad's global businesses. I support a couple of their different operating companies with both Ronstad SourceRight as well as Monster. And while I too have been both directly and indirectly impacted by this horrible disease, I'm really here today to talk about the importance of organizations having flexible programs in place to support not only an aging population, but more importantly, the caregivers and the burdens that they are carrying today.
All right, thank you, Kim. And lastly, we'll say good morning to Edie.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Edie Yao. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Engagement at the Alzheimer's Association. And when I started at the association, this wasn't personal, but I lost my father-in-law this year to Alzheimer's. So, it certainly does impact so many of us. So happy to be here.
All right. Happy to have you all. Let's get right to some of our questions. And we want to start with the topic that is something of a theme this morning, and that is longevity and how that incorporates itself into, at times, an aging workforce. People are, working longer, quite frankly, to pay the bills. And with modern medicine the way it is, that's just a fact of life. Kim, I want to start with you here as the VP of HR for a major global business like Randstad. Why does longevity as it relates to retaining employees matter so much?
Longevity matters because the longer you're able to retain employees, it cultivates expertise, which can be a differentiating factor for a company. And in many instances, both on the employer side and the employee side, we're seeing a bubble up of absenteeism for various reasons across the board, not just with aging workers, but with people that have caring responsibilities. And I think overall, employers are becoming increasingly aware of the need to have flexible programs and policies in place that support an aging workforce as well as caregivers, so that they are not forced to make the decision of leaving their employment to care for their loved ones.
Makes sense. And Bradley, you've, looking at your LinkedIn resume, you've had so many neat jobs. It's impressive. What does longevity mean for your organization in terms of, dealing with what is oftentimes a multi-generational workforce now? You have boomers, you have 22-year-olds. How can everybody thrive in the way of longevity and retention?
Well, I certainly echo what Kim said as far as the tribal knowledge that you get is huge. And I certainly do. I have people that are 40 and 45-year veterans of the station. They've worked there for, when you really stop and think about what has changed in the world over the last 40 years, and that they've been there through all of that. And it is a technological business. So I think that, one of the big things I look for and I stress is that all of us, within reason, have a duty and obligation within our companies to stay relevant. And so it's important to stay on top of the tech because, as we all know, at some point, there has to be that sense that just because you've been here for 35 years doesn't mean you get to stop learning and stop staying on top of the current technology and information. So I know that's, and again, it's all just changing so fast. So I know that creates some challenges. I'm a big believer in training. You have to be supportive for that. You have to create and cultivate an environment that, establishes the learning as an important value and that we're all perpetual and life learners. And then again, being understanding and allowing people time and chances to learn and providing the training. And as I often say, in this land of the internet, there's becoming less and less excuses for not knowing how to do something, because even if you don't know, you can ask YouTube and somebody, if not 20 people, have made it a tutorial video on something. So I think there is that sense that it's sort of a meet in the middle, right? The folks with the tenure and longevity have to be willing to continue to learn and change and adapt and can't sort of want to sit still. And with that, the resources have to be provided. And of course, people have to be willing to go and take it and adapt and embrace the new things.
All makes sense. Kiva, you are a Harvard alum, so obviously, or not, maybe not obviously, but we'll give you this question. Early last year, Harvard Business School Weekly, the newsletter they have, they wrote, quote, "No company will be able to ignore the growing burdens on caregivers for much longer. Companies that tackle the issue now will build talent pools that provide a competitive advantage for years to come." So I ask you, how does this relate to longevity and wellness in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the short answer is simply, we as organizations and companies always look to our employees to evolve and to adjust. I think as Bradley and Kim have already highlighted, as times change, as client needs change. But the reality is we can't exclusively ask our employees to adjust and evolve if we as organizations don't also evolve and change and flex. And I think as we saw kind of at the start with Elizabeth sharing all the statistics, the reality is Alzheimer's and dementia, it's touching more and more people, and we're living longer. And so if we think about that, knowing that folks need to work, as organizations, we have an obligation to really think through how do we flex our own business models and, more importantly, our ways of operation, so that we can ensure that we're actually meeting people where they are and providing the flexibility that's actually required for them to be caregivers, in addition to being a marketing director or an art director, if that's in fact what they are doing. And so all that to say, as we think about it, at least at Material, it's kind of when we look at COVID, we haven't just quickly reverted back to everyone go into an office space. We've shifted towards, we're going to have a flexible working environment, because we know some folks want to be in a physical workspace, but we only want to do that when it's safe. And we also know that there's some folks that really need to be able to work from home. Me being one of those, with the 2-year-old child at home and negotiating it with my wife, who's also a CEO of an organization. And so all that to say, when we're flexing when it comes to COVID, as organizations, we have to flex mindful of what our employees are communicating their lived experiences actually are, not versus what we thought they were 20 years ago. And so from that perspective, when it comes to longevity, we look at it from an individual lens, but we also need to look at it from an organizational lens, which means for Material or for any of our organizations to kind of grow with the times and evolve with our people, it means flexing how we work. It means being mindful of the fact that not only do we want to be human and have conversations with employees when their life circumstances change, but also we want to equip our management team so that way they're better prepared to have those conversations and not always have those burdens sit with an employee that might be grappling with the fact that their dad is now grappling with Alzheimer's. And then they've also got to have the conversation with their manager around how they can provide that flexibility. So all of that is really about organizationally shifting our habits and evolving to meet our people where they are, and not exclusively waiting for our people to kind of bring their burdens or their challenges to us and then help them sort it out on their own. It's a give and take relationship.
Yeah. So many people that are caregivers also have young kids. You mentioned how you negotiate with your wife. I bet you also negotiate with your 2-year-old, which is
yes, I lose those negotiations quite a bit, but I will keep trying.
That's a whole nother issue. Yeah, I have a 4 and a 6-year-old. So I'm right there with you. All right. Next question. We're going to talk about wellness and what specific programs or policies that maybe your companies have, or that companies you've worked for in the past, or that you've even heard of, that really try to tangibly support caregivers and their employees, and how you do that, and what companies can do for folks out there listening to help their people. Specifically the folks who are caregivers. And Bradley, we'll start with you.
There we go. Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to really make sure there's open lines of communication. We've talked about this as far as wellness really does start with feeling supported, I think, and Andy makes a great point as far as going to his boss. And I often counsel and teach folks that you can keep your personal and your work life separate until such time that one overflows into the other, and we all know that usually happens sooner or later. And so I really encourage that aspect as far as talking to the managers and your boss, and having an open dialogue about the situation you're going through. And with that, then hopefully does come that support. And so the wellness then is finding the time and creating the balance. And really, like we say, the pandemic has been a huge game changer as far as us recognizing when we work, where we work, how we work, and just finding those ways to create that space. I think is really an important piece of how to manage this. And then beyond that, I think wellness is personalized, right? You have to know yourself. And that's something, again, that I work with managers to encourage their employees to know, where do you find your strength? Where do you find your, or more to the point, even for managers, where do your employees find their things? And do you help them a little bit to get the time they need? And do the things that will be restorative, because I think that's a big piece of it, in order to get up every day and deal with the challenges that come with not just work, but caregiving and in both directions, like we say, whether it's an ailing or aging family member or the young kids or both.
Kim, next to you, how do we make sure these people are okay?
I think a lot of it starts with ensuring that we have flexible programs in place for people to be able to work when it makes sense for them and doesn't put them in a position where they have to choose between their careers and their domestic obligations. So I think having lots of dialogue as an organization around what we are doing to promote employee wellness, to support flexibility. Some examples of things that we are doing across many of the Randstad global businesses are business resource groups and employee resource groups that are really focused on parents and caregivers. We've done a lot of different enhancements through our EAP providers. We have a lot of company sponsored benefits through Bright Horizons, through care.com. We do a lot around memberships for employee wellness, mental wellness. And I think while, at the end of the day, money matters, everybody needs to continue working, offering programmatic and discretionary flexible programs really is key to employee retention and business success. So aside from those, some of the other things that we have adopted are flexible work arrangements and schedules, additional self-care days so that people can just take extra days off to care for family members, just for their own mental wellness, as well as paid sick leave and various other enhanced benefits through our EAPs. So really coming front and center with the company's position on our commitment to wellness and flexibility, I think has helped tremendously.
Kiva Wilson, same question to you.
Yeah, so in a similar vein as Kim, we at Material, we have a Parents Village employee resource group, and it's a broad reaching in the sense of anyone that is in a caregiving capacity. And I will say it's tremendous. It's a relatively new employee resource group, but it was, again, generated and sparked by employees saying, this is a need, this is a community we want to find and we want to kind of cultivate. But on top of that, in simply creating space for us to find community amongst each other, it allows me from a leadership position and also my fellow executive team members to understand what's going on and what are the actual employee needs. Because I think, as we know, and perhaps we haven't stated explicitly, is that those needs vacillate. They vacillate on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, and it's a nice way to keep a pulse on what's on people's minds, what are their needs, where their needs being met, and where their needs not being met, so that we as an organization can pivot where we can actually sustain some of those changes. So I will say, just actually establishing a forum for people to talk and communicate and provide that support, I think makes a huge difference. But the other thing that I think is really important in terms of actually supporting and meeting people and understanding people's needs is, I think, Kim, as you shared around the flexible work environment, just giving the flexibility of the hours makes a world of difference for an organization and for people, but it makes it sustainable when it's easy for someone to say, I'm working different hours because I need to take care of my dad, but I can go back in and actually look at the Slack channel and understand what was discussed in the meeting, so I'm not playing catch up. So simply enabling some of the asynchronous documentation of what conversations are being had, or some of the critical things we can do as an organization to support people as we're negotiating hybrid and flexible work environments. And I think that really can be meaningful. And one third thing I just wanted to kind of add that's been a best practice from my previous organization is, in addition to doing kind of an annual, 2 times a year, we do an employee engagement survey, just generally around how are they feeling at the organization. But we would actually do additionally 1 time a year a general benefits survey, which allowed employees to tell us what they were grappling with at home, but also, what type of transportation benefits they're looking for, stuff that feels a little bit more perfunctory for some, but it created a forum for us to kind of understand how many of our employees are tackling caregiving responsibilities that we may not be aware of, so that in an aggregate, we really could think through what are the types of systems and support that we can put into place across the organization to support people, as opposed to having it solely sit with the individual employee raising that concern whenever it showed up. And so I think just establishing that cadence of gathering and understanding what employee needs are helps us as organizations be better partners to our people, so that we can frankly just meet their needs and I think be human.
Good tips there. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit, talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And earlier this year, the Alzheimer's Association released a special report. I know we reported on it, as did ABC7. The report was called Race, Ethnicity, and Alzheimer's in America. Edie, I'd love it if you could discuss, I guess, the disproportionate impact, unfortunately, of dementia and caregiving in general on some of these marginalized communities.
Sure. Thanks, Grant. Well, you heard Elizabeth earlier kind of give you that overall summary of the facts and figures report. And every year we do this, and the burden is certainly growing. You think about people living with Alzheimer's and also caregivers, over 11 million caregivers, unpaid caregivers. But just to put a pin on a little bit more detail about the caregivers, 2/3 of them are in fact women, and 1 in 3 caregivers is 65 or older. Over half of primary caregivers are taking care of their parents. And when we look at the diversity, Black caregivers are more likely to provide more than 40 hours of care per week than white caregivers, and more likely to care for someone with dementia. And additionally, when we look at Hispanic, Latino, and Asian American dementia caregivers, they tend to indicate greater care demands. And so what's happening here? They're using less outside formal services, and may report greater depression when compared with white caregivers. And so what that means is, when we're thinking about our employed caregivers, take into account what's happening in the home. I think Bradley had pointed out, it's important to let your supervisor know that what your caregiving situation is at home. AARP actually did a report and said that 1 in 3 employed caregivers say that their supervisors do not know their caregiving situation. And so I think on the reverse, it's really important that managers are also inquiring and asking about the caregiving situation at home. And I think what we're hearing here in this conversation is the importance of really creating this culture of understanding of elder care needs. And so whether it's, creating these ERGs around caregiving, or, building that relationship between manager and employee, it's really understanding what the situation is at home. All of these flexible schedules and all of that is great for retention and really building that longevity of your employees in the workplace. But we see that this burden is certainly growing, and really and taking a look at the equity piece, right? And examining what are some of the needs among the caregivers in your workplace, because they may differ. It's not everyone is going to use an adult day program or can afford to flex their schedule depending on their work situation or their home life situation.
Thanks, Edie. Kiva, I want to ask you, how do you, maybe personally or at Material, distinguish between equity, as we're talking about, and equality, and strive for the former?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Edie and what she just shared actually answered it right there, which is that not everyone is going to necessarily want or need that day program, the actual full day program. For some of us, it might be a different arrangement that we're after. And so if we were striving for equality, we would say, across the world, we're going to make this general commitment. I use this analogy all the time, which is everyone gets a t-shirt. Wonderful. Everyone's going to get a medium-sized purple t-shirt. It is cut for typically a man's body, but it's a medium, and you're all going to get it. So wonderful. We're in a better state of the world, when in fact that some of us might be swimming in that medium-sized t-shirt. Some of us might actually need a 2XL. That is really what equity is versus equality. You give everybody a t-shirt all the same size. That's equality. That's not really recognizing the fact that people are different and people have different needs. And you have to meet people based off of their specific needs, which is really what you enable with equity. And I think, as Edie, you so astutely point out, is it requires an honest conversation from person to person, because really calibrating and understanding what that individual is seeking, what type of support they would like to see for themselves and for their family, is what better positions us to actually strive for equity, which is meeting someone where they are, not just simply giving someone what you think everyone should deserve, because while it may make you feel good as the giver, it's actually not in service to the person that you were really trying to support and benefit.
So yeah, not helpful to everyone.
Yeah.
Edie, are there gender differences that we're seeing in balancing caregiving and work?
Yeah, so as earlier we mentioned, 2/3 of caregivers are women, right? And we're probably seeing this of children, but in fact also of older adults or spouses. And so when we're looking at Alzheimer's caregiving, it is in fact more women than men. And again, thinking about some of those disparities in terms of not just gender, but social identity, race, and ethnicity. And I also want to mention that LGBTQ individuals are also disproportionately affected by Alzheimer's and have some unique challenges around caregiving. In fact, 30% of LGBT individuals who are living with dementia live alone. And so imagine, how does that work? And if you're a remote distance family member or fictive kin or friend, it becomes an interesting challenge to make sure that those individuals are also supported.
All right. We have some questions that we've received from folks watching and listening. Undine, could you read some of those, please?
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here at this panel. And I just hope that we can address a few of these questions that came in during the Q&A. One being, what does your organization do to develop a care culture that supports employees' changing needs?
If anyone would like to take that, if not, Kim, we can start with you.
Sure. I think what we are doing in many instances, you know, aside from the business resource groups as well as employee resource groups, is really getting front and center and talking to people about what our wellness benefits are. We have in one of our global businesses, giving everybody a membership to the CALM application. So just really looking at different Weeds Virgin Pulse for employee wellness and just promoting lots of different programs where they can go for various needs, because to everybody's earlier points, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So while it's important to have those programmatic programs in place, it's also you need to have those discretionary things that are really giving people what they need and you know, doing it in a way that it allows them to balance both their domestic obligations, caregiving obligations, as well as their career. So I think just an overall awareness and constantly looking at the programs that you have in place and really encouraging people, if they have a specific need, to bring it forward so we can talk about specific resources to meet them where they are currently.
All right. If anybody else wants to add anything, Bradley?
Yeah, I'll just add that, you know, on the large level, Disney, starting about 2015, took a really different approach across the board to their employees, and that was to say that they took a much more benevolent approach. So they rewrote the entire handbook. And the way I always explain this to people is, most of us, we get a job and we've all gotten that standard employee handbook, and it's usually written to the bad actors, right? Most of us on this panel, I'm assuming, and listening in, didn't need to be told not to bring your weapons to work, not to bring drugs, but yet there it is, right? It was all there. So Disney kind of took a different look and said, you know what, the majority of the people that work for this company are good people, they're hard workers, they're contributors. And so the very beginning of it was to rewrite the handbook and to write it much more towards the good people who come to work, and realizing that we will address the bad when it materializes and take care of it. And then so the trickle down of that to the business unit level of ABC7 was, you know, my approach when I talk to managers is look to say yes, right? We all know that there's sometimes that old school management style that the natural reaction to anything outside of the normal framework is to say no, right? The question comes and it's just an automatic no. And I often coach the managers and work towards, well, let's look for every reason to say yes. Sometimes you can't, but you're trying, and you're trying to establish that so that people understand that it is a place where you can come and make the big asks, and hopefully management will at least not be dismissive and hear you out and try to work towards a solution. So when you look at the caregivers, that's what I think about is talking about how do you support them in every way that you possibly can, with an understanding that, you know, it could be any one of us next that has to deal with these outside of work challenges while still attending very much to our careers and our source of income. So it's that's kind of how I think that Disney looked at it, was to say, let's be a lot kinder where we can to all the people that make a huge difference to the betterment of the company.
To that, we say yes. Thanks, Bradley. Next question.
I think we have time for just one more, and I really want to hone in. There's a lot of folks asking about stigma and fear around losing jobs because of their family needs or their own brain health. So number one, how can working people worried about their brain health be encouraged to seek medical help and not be worried about losing their jobs or insurance? And kind of on the same vein with caregivers, when they're fearing losing their jobs because of their family needs, how are employers going to help measure the employee's time value to the company? What has been the disparities with people being laid off because of having to leave the workforce? I know that's a lot, but hopefully we can just touch on a few of those things.
Yeah, Kiva, if we can start with you, it's a touchy situation, right? Maybe you're aging, maybe you're not, but if you feel yourself declining cognitively, you know, human nature is you would fear losing your job if you can't perform, and then how do you start that conversation and make yourself so vulnerable without feeling so scared?
Yeah, I mean, it is an incredibly touchy situation, but I think the reality, and perhaps I'm oversimplifying this, but we think about, we're committed to deep human understanding. That's kind of one of our core tenets. And I think undergirding that is the expectation that you have to have open dialogue and conversation. There's nothing worse as a person of color. There's nothing worse than trying to hide and pretend like my Blackness does not influence the way that I experience these statistics compared to someone else. I can't imagine grappling with what you perceive to be your cognitive decline and not being able to have that conversation with your manager. It only adds to the load and the tax. And so all of it to say, I think there has to be an organizational commitment to regular conversation with your people. It sounds incredibly simple, whether or not it's on a monthly basis or on a weekly basis, but establishing that with the recurring conversations that we have, we talk about you as a professional, but also as a person, and creating that space so that it becomes part of the rhythm of how you have conversations, so that at the very least, we can reduce the cognitive weight that someone feels with having to, out of the blue, have a conversation with their manager around them feeling that they're cognitively declining because they haven't actually talked to their manager in the last 6 months. So if I'm honest, there's no way to get rid of the stigma in and of itself. But I do think one of the best muscles we can develop within our organizations, as well as professionals, are the recurring conversations that start to normalize seeing professionals as people and people as professionals, so that this does not feel like something that has to be a complete unveiling, but in fact is part of a longer conversation and as a general sense of commitment and development to seeing someone take care of themselves as a member of your team, but also as a human. I would love to hear from other panelists because this is incredibly tricky.
Jump in, anyone, if you have something to add on that.
I'll just add that, you know, again, it is about this organization. This is a societal problem. It might sound harsh to say, but when you put it in a sort of simple term, we all understand that the world's best brain surgeon, if you're going in for brain surgery tomorrow and 2 weeks ago they had a car accident and had traumatic brain injury and have a severe, you know, diminishment in their abilities, that maybe they're not the world's best brain surgeon anymore, and you want somebody else performing on you. And so that's not to cold-heartedly say that this person who had a prominent career and did all these wonderful things shouldn't be cared for and taken care of, but from a pure business standpoint, when you're talking about a company, you are talking about somewhere in there that if somebody is slipping or below a certain level, that has to be a concern, and the company has to do certain things that protect the company and the business and the outcome. So it's not about cutting someone loose necessarily, but I look at this as, and I've lived in various other countries, you know, that we have to look at how we address this as a larger society. And I think it does involve getting involved in these organizations and lobbying and going bigger, because to put the full onus just on a company or a business and say that you have, you know, the heart of a company can only get so big, right? There has to be that point where it has to be addressed, or somebody perhaps can't perform their work anymore, or at least at the level they were doing it. And those things get addressed. And that's, of course, from an HR side, what we look at. You want to be kind, you want to be benevolent, you want to be understanding, but somewhere in there has to be something. So that's where you look at where is society to say, we're going to have those support services and safety nets for people should they experience these things and need to leave their careers, and what are we going to offer and how are we going to support people. So I think these are great organizations that are looking to better society for that, because it can't fall entirely on a company.
Yeah.
Grant, I just really want to pick up on just, you know, people concerned about their brain health, and just to know that the Alzheimer's Association, you know, as Andy had suggested, calling the helpline. That's what we're here for, is our 24/7 helpline is available for free care consultation with professionals if you're concerned about your own work situation or just cognitive decline or whatnot. That's always available, and our website.
Yeah, I think definitely the helpline has really helped me, like I said, during my first couple of minutes, but also the idea of, you know, sharing, you know, what's happening, you know, in my situation, you know, has been such a positive experience. I think not just with my own boss, but also with my own colleagues. And, you know, when you start sharing, you know, what's happening, you end up finding more people like you. And you know, in some ways, you know, created almost like a little support group among folks. You discuss situation, how you dealt, you know, how you would deal with certain things. And as I was saying, you know, with my dad, we also got a lot of hugs, I think, from a lot of people. I think sometimes, I think that human touch is also really important as part of that support. And don't be afraid to speak up. You're gonna find seriously a lot more people in the situation than you would ever expect, and that in itself is part of the journey.
All right, thanks everybody for being here. Unfortunately we're almost out of time, and we do want to keep this on time. So you know, Andy, thank you for sharing your story. Edie, obviously, always great to see you and have your expertise. Kim, Kiva, Bradley, thank you so much for your time and sharing really some insights and things to get people thinking. If you're a CEO or a manager, or if you're, you know, a regular worker employee who, you know, maybe should initiate conversation with their boss more to keep those lines open. So thank you so much to all of you. Finally, before everybody goes, I want to introduce Ian Murray. He's the Director of Sales Operations at Cisco. He's been with us in the past, a friend of the organization, and Ian's here now to share how he's been making a difference with his company. Hey, Ian.
Hey, Grant, good to see you again. So thanks for having me. I've been involved in Alzheimer's Association for quite a while. I volunteer in memory of my dad, my gran, my aunt, and my uncle, all lost to the disease. And so I really want to see an end to this terrible disease. As I say, I'm at Cisco. We have many employee resource groups, including an Alzheimer's awareness group, as well as an adult caregiver group. And you know, through those ERGs, our partnership with the association has continued to grow over the years, with many great sessions we've had for our employees on brain health, dementia awareness, as well as caregiver education. And so we have a really strong partnership between Cisco and the association. And it's really easy to get started. So let me give you some ideas. I'll give you 3 ideas on how you can get started within your company to make a bigger impact, and hopefully we can get an end to this disease. First is talk to your colleagues. talk to them about why you want to make a difference, your commitment to the cause. You'll be surprised that there are many others that are affected as well and want to make a difference. And so, you know, when you make those connections, now you've got a group of people that want to make a difference, and it's going to be a lot easier when there's more of you working together. So step one, talk to your colleagues. Second also is to engage those employee resource groups, the affinity groups within your company. You know, many of them may be looking for new speakers. And as we heard from the panel and from Elizabeth earlier, you know, there are impacts to different parts of society, to the different diversity groups. You know, with increased awareness, we can actually make a difference. And so the more we can share information about the services, you know, and what's available to each of those groups can really make a difference. The association has some great topics that they can bring to companies large and small, and really help improve people's awareness of the services, like Andy mentioned, or just awareness of you know, symptoms and you know, lifestyle choices that can then have an impact to the disease itself. And then third is start a walk team. And so we have the corporate challenge that we run within the San Francisco Bay Area. It's you know, every team on this list started as a team of one. There's no cost to enter. There's no fundraising minimums. And you know, I'm sure all of your companies and leaders encourage engaging with outside groups, and so this is a great way to get involved. With Cisco, we started as a team with one person. Started the team, sent an email, 4 other people joined. That first team was 5 people plus 1 dog, and so that was the way that we started the Cisco team. Fast forward 6 years, we have over 20 teams across the country in different time zones in different states. We have over 200 walkers walking with us regularly the last couple of years. And, you know, that's a combination of co-workers, family, friends, many dogs. Overall, in the last 6 years, we've been able to raise $600,000 for the cause. And so it really starts with just a team of one. So there's really no excuse. It's real easy. All you have to do is start a team, tell your colleagues, engage with the others within your company, and you can truly make a difference to this disease.
Inspirational. Thank you, Ian. 600 grand. That is a ton of money, necessary money. You mentioned start a team. And if anybody's out there watching and hasn't walked with us in the past, really encourage you to do so. There is going to be a in-person walk this fall. If you're good with that, great. It's an incredible, inspirational morning and a community that comes together. If you'd like to do it kind of with your bubble, with your family, if you're not good with crowds yet, that's totally fine too. Really, the important thing is, and you can do this all on your computer, is you know, just go to the Alzheimer's website. You see a link there, but if you just Google Alzheimer's Association, you will find a walk near you. The website is good about directing people there, and there are walks all over the Bay Area, all over the country. So I'm going to be the MC at the San Francisco walk in November, but there are, again, walks at all different times this fall at all different places. So really encourage you to start a team and share that you're starting a team with your friends and coworkers. It's been said that you'd be shocked at how many people you work with that you have no idea either have a really personal connection, who want to join your team to help out, or who are caregivers currently, and you just had no idea that that was the case. You see a poll here on your screen. We would love to know how you might want to get more involved. Some options there if you'd like more info, how you can become you know, a more active participant in this cause that means so much to so many, and that is ending this horrible disease. So let us know how you might want to get more involved there on that interest card, and we will be sure to follow up with you in that regard. Thank you to everybody for being here again. Really a great conversation. Every year we do this, I feel like I learn 5 or 10 new things. And it's such a good use of expertise bringing these people together. So thank you again to our panelists, and thank you to everyone who joined with your questions. Be well, everybody, and hope to see you either at Walk or next year. Have a great day.